Now, let's begin the making of commentary. First, we'll create the main element, the lotus flower. Starting with a flat plane as the base, we'll use subdivision surface to shape the petals. This time we're making an artificial flower, so the motif is a bit unusual, but the overall shape will be based on a real flower. While keeping in mind the slightly curved shape of the petals, I made the form symmetrical. By doing this, the flower takes on a neat shape not found in nature, which emphasizes its artificial quality. Now that the shape of the petals is done, I'll add some decorations to part of them. This also serves to further emphasize the artificial nature of the flower. For the material, I used something with a sci-fi look. At the same time, I wanted to retain the feel of a lotus flower, so I used nodes to add a pink gradient to the base color. I also gave it a glossy metallic texture to make it look more artificial. From here, I'll duplicate the petals to form a single flower. Using an array modifier, I arranged the petals in a circular pattern, positioning them so they spread outward. After finishing the arrangement of the petals, I moved on to creating the central part. By using curves, I created parts that resemble pistils, and just like with the petals, I duplicated them in a circular pattern. When duplicating, I intentionally arrange them in a uniform manner without shifting them, which creates a neat appearance and makes it look even more artificial. For the center, I designed an antenna supported by the pistil-like parts. Next, I placed buildings around the flower. For the building models, I used assets, and for placement, I utilized the GeoScatter add-on. Since buildings are automatically added just by duplicating the base plane, this method works extremely well for large-scale scenes like this one. At the same time, I adjusted the camera settings and added a plane for the sea. To convey the vastness of the scene, I also adjusted the size of the nose and placed objects further in the background. Next, I moved on to creating the cables. To allow for later adjustments to their size and shape, I based the cables on geometry nodes. I set up the geometry nodes so that multiple cables are generated in a bundle along a single reference curve. Additionally, by configuring the nodes to add twists according to the length of the curve, I made the cables look more realistic. For the material, I used textures, but since there wasn't quite enough detail, I made some adjustments to add bluish-white glowing effects in certain areas. Also, since I wanted more variation in the silhouette of the cables themselves, I added metal parts to bundle the cables together. These were also added using geometry nodes, so they are automatically placed in the correct orientation along the curve. For the flower material as well, I rearranged the nodes so that certain parts emit light. If the entire flower glows uniformly, it stands out too much, so I adjusted the intensity of the light to create a gradient toward the center of the flower. Also, since the pattern positions on each petal ended up being the same, I adjusted the nodes to fix this as well. The system assigns a random value to each petal, and the UVs shift according to that value. There is a gap between the flowers and the buildings, so I will place trees here. Since it's above the sea, it might seem a bit odd for trees to suddenly grow, but I wanted some greenery for the visual effect, so I'm adding trees. Now that I've filled the gaps around the nose, I'll also fill the gaps on the seaside with tables. I'll arrange them while adjusting parameters such as the shapes, sizes, and twists that I set earlier using the geometry density. Since I want these cables to serve the role of delivering energy to the flower, I'm also paying attention to their orientation so that it fits with that concept. Finally, I pull the camera back a bit and add cables and buildings to match the framing. Once the scene is complete, I render it, and that wraps up the work in Blender. Now I'll move on to the explanation in Photoshop. This time, since the making process turned out to be quite complex, I'll be explaining while looking at the finished data. What you're seeing now is the image right after rendering in Blender. First, I make some color adjustments. Basically, the main adjustments are slightly lifting the shadows and tweaking the overall brightness. On top of that, I shift the color tone a bit towards warmer hues. From here, I add atmospheric perspective effects. Using the Z-depth image obtained from Blender, I create an effect where the background gradually becomes whiter as it recedes. Additionally, I overlay line art here. By adding this, the contours become clearer, giving it an illustration-like appearance. However, if you apply this too strongly to the background, it becomes too pronounced, so I make the lines in the background lighter and more faded. Next, I make adjustments for each individual part. First, I create a mask for just the ocean area and make adjustments. Specifically, since the ocean ended up looking dark and sunken, I adjust the colors to make it brighter and more vivid. Additionally, I use this step to express details that were lost during rendering, such as the appearance of waves, as well as things like cables and buildings that seem to be submerged. Next is the adjustment of the trees. For the trees, I make adjustments to make them brighter and more saturated. The flowers are basically adjusted in the same way. However, for the single flower in the background, since it is quite far away and appears faded, I haven't used any techniques to emphasize it much. The cables are processed in the same way. I increase the brightness a bit and add a glossy effect. Next, I enhance the illuminated areas. Specifically, I emphasize parts that are strongly lit, such as the light from the flowers or the windows of the buildings. Here as well, I adjust it so that the effect becomes weaker as it moves into the background. Then, I paint clouds over this. For the clouds, I use a cloud brush and paint them by placing them rather than focusing on their core. Just painting the clouds like this is fine, but by adding shadow colors underneath, it creates a sense of three-dimensionality. I also consider the influence from areas outside the visible frame and try to cast the shadows of the clouds over the entire city. From here, I add light effects. I overlay the glare image exported from Blender onto the flowers. Furthermore, I add the sunlight coming from the upper left here. If you simply draw the rays of light in white, they end up looking dull. So by adding green or pink hues and incorporating a slightly anime-like expression, it becomes visually clear that it's sunlight. Finally, I adjust the overall color tone and contrast, and then it's complete. That concludes today's explanation. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Well then, see you in the next video.